Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Crafty Nihilist. Our first live stream in a little while. We've been gallivanting, obviously, partly at the Glastonbury Symposium, which I'm going to be talking about tonight. Also had a nice little weekend at the Sidmouth Folk Festival, just getting our jollies on. It was all very good. So yeah, thanks for joining us. As I say, it's been a bit of a hiatus, but hopefully going to find lots of things interesting. It was another fantastic Glastonbury Symposium this year and lots of amazing speakers. Just have to apologise, first of all, that didn't get to see absolutely every speaker. So apologies for those that aren't mentioned. But yeah, it was a fantastic conference. A little bit different experience for us as the Crafty Nihilists because Liz had her stall upstairs, which was. But yeah, it was a fantastic conference. A little bit different experience for us as the Crafty Nihilists because Liz had her stall upstairs. What's the matter? That's because you're in the. I can hear you. I can hear you. Yeah, sorry about that intervention. So yeah, Liz was in another room during the conference and is now going to be in another room now. So apologies there was a little bit of echo there. But yeah, stall upstairs. So a little shuttle backwards and forwards from the stall down to the speakers. So as I say, I did miss a few people. Always happens, I suppose, in a big conference, other things going on. But thanks for all of you that can join me tonight. I'm sort of going chronological mainly, but breaking the chronology. The first one up on stage is Juliet Bryant, who was actually a talk later in the weekend, but I decided to put her here first. Talking about Liz having her stalls. Her stall was right next to Juliet's. She was there with her husband Giles, who people will also have seen a lot of times. He's also spoken at the conference, does the perpetual choir. Definitely worth checking all of their stuff out, julietbryant.com. And although we've seen them at a number of conferences before, it was the first time that we really got to speak to them. And Liz, particularly, as I say, she had a stall next door and thoroughly enjoyed being with both of them. Great people, really lovely people. And Juliet's talk was really an energy boost for the whole conference, if you like. She had just such great energy on stage and put her message across really brilliantly. Her thing, if you like, is plants and mushrooms and the benefits that they can give us and their connection with humanity going back to the beginning of time and how they have been used and can still be used to do the most amazing things for our health and consciousness. So Juliet was saying that in the past, the ancients, if you like, used to spend time just being connected to one thing, or being out in nature, spending time with the nature. Things that we've lost, obviously, in our disconnected state. Most of us live in cities and towns. Industrialization, which is continuing, and seems that people want, or the powers that shouldn't be, want to drive us further and further away from the countryside and from what's natural. So Juliet talked about nutrition, about that being about physical being, but also plants and mushrooms. They are there. They help us to awaken. They can be something that really heals our consciousness, I suppose, as well as physical health. I apologize with my notes. I might sort of be a bit scattergun with certain things that to jot little quotes down and things like that, or things that stand out to you. and then you read back at them, and sometimes it might be a little bit disjointed when I'm sort of looking back and reviewing it. But a few things she jumped out at, things, I suppose, this connection that we've had with plants. Obviously, it seems an obvious statement to make, but again, it is something that's been lost. And with all the fast food packaging, factories, industrialization, it really is things that have got lost. Sage, Juliet was saying, that is about wisdom, and we have that in the language. You know, a sage is supposed to be a wise elder as a person. It's things like that, linguistic connections, that show the connections that we have going back through time with plants. But everything has a consciousness of its own, and plants communicate with us, or they certainly can, if we're prepared to listen to them and we are able to receive messages. Juliet is sort of known particularly maybe for her use of mushrooms and things like that. Mycelium is something I know that it's something I want to read more. I haven't really. Was it Merlin Sheldrake? Rupert Sheldrake's son has done that book, which I have, but I haven't read, and I know Liz read it. But mycelium is just such an incredible thing, how it connects up. Was it the wild wood web, as some people have christened it? But as Juliet was saying, this mycelium mind, it's like a huge, like a plant form of consciousness that stretches and links up other plants in the forest, trees, and it's a store of memories. These are the sort of things that we've lost. Juliet was talking about, she was in Peru and she was struck by the reverence to the earth, to plants, and that this is something that's a tradition that has been maintained and continued for centuries up to the present day. So a few things she mentioned about mugwort is a dream opener, and helps you dream, and the consciousness that you get from that. The yew tree, I had heard before, it's about death and rebirth, and for that reason it's often around graveyards, that sort of thing. And it produces a mist which has something psychoactive about it. And it's a tree which, I've got to be careful with things that I say are probably on YouTube as ever, but it's supposed to, Juliet was talking about how it destroys cells of the big C. I suppose it's always difficult to say about what yeah, I don't want to actually recommend what it's actually might be good for, because it'll probably get done for misinformation or something like that. She was referring, of course, as well to things like cannabis and the what's known as magic mushrooms, things that have given the highest classification in terms of their illegality by the authorities. But part of that classification as being illegal is that they have no therapeutic benefit, and this is clearly something that's untrue, and this is what Juliet wants to encourage the people that can come back and learn the therapeutic benefits of these things, because they have been misused, and a lot of these substances can cause great harm and difficulties psychologically or physically to people. But used in the right way, they can absolutely be of great therapeutic benefit. A lot of this has been suppressed. Juliet was talking about how hemp appears in a lot of place names in Britain, like Hemel Hempstead. And she was saying, what do you think they used to grow? Wheat, and which is something which made sense to me, that it's in the language, and that shows the roots of how far back these things go and how they used to be commonplace and used all the time. And these completely natural things that would grow by the wayside, by the roadside, or in people's gardens, in the fields. They would be cultivated, and they would use for mental and physical health and for expanding consciousness. And these things have been either eradicated or they've been demonized, made illegal. Juliet mentioned as well something that Liz has mentioned before, how so many plants that are just found by the side of the road in gardens are classified as weeds, and they're something that people are encouraged to get rid of, and they're seen as being destructive. And again, those are usually the plants that have great medicinal qualities and can be used for health. So shamans use is it fly agaric mushroom, and as I think I mentioned on my Yule special, there has been a lot of connections. Juliet mentioned briefly that it could be the origins of Father Christmas, and I think I mentioned during that talk there are legends that, you know, when you got the reindeer, and that there's something about psychoactive substances, and that could have been the basis for the legend about the reindeer flying through the sky. So Juliet mentioned Terence McKenna and his Stoned Ape book. Obviously his encouragement of psychedelics, and what he said, the change in consciousness in humans that is connected to psychedelics. This is not to say that Juliet is all about psychedelics. Quite often in a talk she had to say, and these are things which I definitely do not recommend people to do in answer to questions about what certain things should be taken to help certain other things. As she said, the powerful don't want radical creative thinkers. So a lot of these psychoactive substances are about melting of the layers to bliss, is what I've written down. So that was probably using her words. And I think melting the layers of reality, in terms of what we perceive as reality, is quite a strong theme for the conference as a whole, and, you know, a number of the speakers, as I'll go through. So she talked about finding natural ways, so not synthetic substances, but natural ways to you know, expand your consciousness, or to get into a place where you can have a different appreciation of reality. She mentioned in passing as well that there's been another book, I'm sorry I can't remember the title of it, a couple of books actually talking about the effect of psychedelic mushrooms in Christianity, and obviously they are fundamental to so many religions' beliefs. Again, these psychoactive substances, and how, going back to the shamanic practices, and I'll talk about that and one of the other speakers as well. So what Juliet was recommended is that people get their hands dirty, that they grow things themselves, they go foraging. But she was saying that they should have if you like, following the Celtic tradition, should ask a tree or a plant permission before cutting something off. It should be about having a good intention when growing, when gathering, when making things, and only taking as much as you need. So if you're cutting something from a tree to use, leaving enough so that there will still be something for other animals and, you know, the life of the forest to use. So it's, I guess, about balance as well. But yeah, Juliet makes a number of her own products, which you can get via the julietbryant.com. And we've sampled some of it, some mushroom and cacao, some fantastic powdered drinks, which I know Liz has really enjoyed. So I just urge you to check out Juliet's website, and she has a number of retreats, workshops, all those sort of things. She's incredibly active, and her products, like I say, I think are of great benefit, and she has books as well. Her talk went brilliantly well, and people were storming the stall afterwards and sold out of all of her stuff and her books and everything else. So yeah, definitely recommend her everything that she does. So apologies, just need to get to my next part. So the next person that I'm going to talk about is Ewan Mockery. Do apologize. One moment. So Ewan's talk was entitled "How Reality Works." And like a lot of speakers here, or this symposium this year and also in the past, a number of them sort of, part of the talk is at least going through their own journey as to how they got to where they were up to this point. I suppose in a way, sometimes for some people, the symposium is quite a big stage to get on. So it's a case of looking at going through sort of life changes that sort of drew them to get to where they are. Excuse me. Quite a few people have had very different life experiences and come from different backgrounds in a more conventional world, shall we say. So Ewan, I think he was someone who wasn't like a skeptical viewpoint, and quite, if you want to use the term, normie. But he came to realize that there are different levels to reality that are beyond our normal perception. Just to sort of jump ahead a little bit, some quotes of his that I wrote down when he's talking about the foundations of our reality and how they're shifting. He's saying, you exist, you go from one now to another, and everything changes. Go into these things a little bit more. But he talked about seeing, I think, as at a conference in America, this David Morehouse may be familiar to some of you, who, that's his book, Psychic Warrior, or one of his books at least. So he is a remote viewer, and he said he was involved with this, I think it was called Stargate, the US military program to use remote viewing and to use it for spying and as a weapon. Ewan was talking about how that program was declassified in 1995, but it was only declassified in terms of them saying that they had a program, but it was still downplayed as to how effective it was or what it achieved, that sort of thing. But Ewan said he started to find out about astral projection. He was talking about a technique to be able to start it. This is something that, again, jotting down notes, but I think it involves something about sort of imagining to be sleepwalking in a different room of your house to the one that you're sleeping in. I guess it's that sort of lucid dreaming idea. He also mentioned another US Army remote viewer in the Stargate program. And it's interesting because that term's been used now for the this AI program that's been talked about with these different companies being involved with the authorities in the US about, I think, sort of nanotechnology for health detection and that sort of thing, supposedly. It's interesting that they've used, again, this strange term Stargate, which obviously, in the science fiction connotations of that is it's like, at the very least, these authorities are obviously playing games with us by using terms like that and putting them out there as like government programs. And they were quite clearly, in whatever way, playing with people's perceptions of mixing it up with what people see on science fiction and that sort of thing. So all this sort of programming that we get. So I believe so another remote viewer, Joe McMonigal, he's also written about his experiences as a remote viewer in this same program, and he's written about time being an illusion in its lineal sense, the one that we obviously perceive day to day. So basically, Ewan's number of different experiences and starting to experience things himself, try out things along the lines of remote viewing, astral projection, those sort of things. And he retrained in neuro-linguistic programming, which is an idea about connecting thought, language, behavior, understanding patterns that can limit our behavior, and also looking at how successful individuals, patterns that can then be passed on to others. And Ewan became involved, or he experienced, Bashar channeling. Again, it seems to have come flicked through my radar. I think I may have heard someone talk about it before, but I'm not very familiar. But I think this is Darryl Anker is someone that's quite well known for channeling this figure called Bashar, who's supposed to then give insights into the future and behaviors and life, the universe, and everything. And Ewan quoted this Darryl Anker. He said Bashar had said, I think in just April of this year, that 90% certain that there will be ET contact by 2027. So that will please you, Ben. Welcome everyone in there, Whisperoon. I'm sorry I won't be able to keep up with the chat very well, but I can see Liz is in there chatting with people. So Ewan himself, I believe, had a sort of channeling experience with this Bashar. He's also talked about having an experience where he was like floating out of bed, I suppose like an alien abduction type of a thing. He was aware of some entities. I think he described it as energy working. I think this was the instance when he said, like, at first he just thought it was like, I think his pet cat was on the bed or something like that, and he was just sort of just moving his foot to sort of get out of the way, and he ended up kicking one of these entities. Now, Ewan talked about another time when he had these different synchronicities in the number 111. And it's funny because this is going to come up again. So many of these talks tend to sort of interlink. But the number 11, that's something that's resonated with us before. 1111, I know, is a common thing that a lot of people see repeated, and there's been various talk about what that signifies. But he kept on seeing the number 111, and then he read that was meant new beginnings. So again, like a number of the speakers, he talking about how there is a reality shift, a paradigm shift that's happening now. Obviously, a lot of people talk about awakenings of consciousness, and of course of, you know, whether there will be disclosure, and about you know, extraterrestrial contact increasing, which is a particular focus with Ewan's talk, how this will change things, but also about just general shifts in reality and things, veils lifting, layers or barriers between worlds disintegrating or becoming more fluid. Ewan was talking about how there was been more ET exposure recently, increased sightings, and of course all the things that have been very prominent in the media about whistleblowers. He thinks this is a loosening of the layers of reality. He quoted Thomas Kuhn about a paradigm shift, talking about things in science where every important idea in science seems strange at first, and as we know so much, which is where they police the science and trust the science, but they're only talking about their version of it and the version that they have it controlled. Green Tea, lovely to see you. Thanks for joining us. Ewan was talking about how our age is about common sense materialism, supposedly, and the classic physics, this sort of Newtonian, and then into relativity, Einstein, this idea of space and time being connected. Ewan was saying we actually all have our own clock, this sort of quantum wave of potentiality, and your consciousness makes things real. Another quote, Julian Barber, time is nothing but change. Change is the measure of time, and not time is the measure of time. So you were talking about systems and configuration, and then about how these systems can change. He used this example, and this is quite sorry, Ben, to overlap the gas spanner again. I know we're always doing it. Sorry about that. Thanks for popping in, my friend. So the horse in motion, this is quite an interesting thing that I've heard about before. 1878, filmed by Edward Muybridge. So apparently there was this debate in the 19th century. People couldn't quite work out if when a horse was running, if there was ever a time when it had no legs touching the ground. It all seems a bit strange now, but so I think this is quite a pioneering thing in terms of the history of film, motion pictures. So all these different frames of this horse in motion, and then you know can see at certain frames that the horse has all of its legs in the air. Ewan was using this as like a metaphor, I suppose you could say, and as a sort of trying to understand and remember how he was describing it. He was talking about the frame of our existence has a different frequency, And if you could impose the frequency of the last frame, for instance, if we're looking at this horse in motion, obviously this is, would be going through space and time, could somehow impose the frequency of the last frame onto the first frame, you could transport to that moment a very, well, I'm not very explaining it very well, but I guess what he was trying to look at, obviously people say, how could there be extraterrestrial travel over billions of miles, light years from one side of the galaxy to another, type of thing. So it's that, again, if those sort of arguments apply in the reality of how we perceive space and time, but of course if you can bend those rules, if you like, because there is actually a basis of space and time, there is this sort of quantum flow. So everything is one thing appearing to be many, separated by frequency and connected by resonance. Time is an illusion, and so is space. So I guess, with these quantum physics ideas, again, as people who have tuned in regularly will know, I'm not a science or a mathematician expert and those sort of things, but it all fascinates me. But I think in a very layman term way, I can appreciate the kind of thing. And certainly I think things like quantum plasma, things like that, show that those Newtonian and other supposed building blocks of science which control the reality of how we perceive it, those rigid frameworks, don't apply in the quantum world. So there is certainly another layer of existence that everything is made from. You've got things like quantum entanglement, where things are linked, at the other side of the galaxy. So from those sort of principles, I think you can see how interstellar or even multidimensional travel can be possible, or these ideas are open. Sorry, keeping myself going with caffeine as well. I know I shouldn't do it this late, but hey. Ian was talking about how you only know you as something other than you. Everything is a projection of your own consciousness. So that connects again to the quantum idea, this idea of something has to be observed for it to change its state from a wave to a particle. So it's about the observer, and so that also comes with the idea of selfhood. Is this idea that you define yourself by others around you. But everything is linked and everything is one. And Ewan was saying how it's a golden rule of all religions in some form, such as karma in Hinduism, this idea that things have an interconnectedness. But I think Ewan's message, if you like, was that he quoted Buckminster Fuller, "We are asked to be the architects of our future, not its victims." So this idea that we can make our own consciousness and we can impose our perceptions on other things to sort of shift the paradigm. We are spirit being physical. Earth is a life school. That's the kind of thing that you hear quite often from people, experiences and that sort of thing. I quoted Kierkegaard as well. Søren Kierkegaard, life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. Now, Ewan quoted Richard Dawkins, who's a bit of a, boo-hiss villain in terms of materialist, but even Dawkins talked about the size of the human brain being explosive, how, in evolution, it all of a sudden had this massive leap. And it's like, what could have caused that enormous increase in the size of the human brain? Ewan was talking around this idea, which again many people have spoken about, but that there was an Anunnaki that mixed the DNA of Homo erectus to genetically modify to make us into what's the earliest Homo sapiens, to make us a sort of slave that makes us capable of, mining gold or whatever they wanted us to do. So we became sort of functioning at a certain level of intelligence to be able to be good workers, basically. The Ewan was saying those Anunnaki who did this were banished, and the sort of aliens coming back now are a little bit maybe just sort of watching over what happened with their creations. He did talk in passing that they about being advanced human civilizations like Atlantis, Lemuria, destroyed at the end of the Ice Age with impacts in the Atlantic. Again, these are ideas that have come up quite a lot. He said, I think that these sort of Anunnaki were from Pleiades. They were Pleiadians. The Greys. Now, he was saying, are humans from a parallel Earth reality who needed gene modification as they were struggling in their physical form, and so they need human DNA in our dimension for hybrids. And from this we can maybe get the chance not to destroy ourselves in the same way. I must admit, things like this I probably already talked before. I guess I find it a little bit difficult to believe some talk when it mentions things like this, but that's not to say at all that I'm ruling anything out, because there's so many amazing, unbelievable things in the universe, and we know a tiny percent of them. And as previously mentioned, there things like quantum physics seem to offer a basis where so much is possible. Sarah Mondini, thanks for joining us. So Sarah Mondini, many will be aware of her work on the Hocus Focus, and now doing her own channel, Wuthering Nights with Sarah Mondini, and sarahmondini.com. So please do check it out. Thanks very much for coming in to join us, Sarah. So yeah, I'm slightly always wary about aliens and UFO talk, but there definitely is things going on which I guess I'm interested to see how they play out. Ewan in his talk was talking about these alien life forms being more spiritually, socially advanced than us, and technologically as well. He was talking about how we would cope with this new paradigm shift if there's ET contact, and how the world will be. And he talks about stepping into the power of you, aligning with your higher self, and trying to tap into this higher conscious mind outside of space-time. Act on passions, let go of fear and negativity. He quoted Neil Donald Walsh, think, act and speak as the God you are. He mentioned the hero's journey and human archetypes, which I've talked about before, about going through these challenges to have a growth in yourself. He said, know that you're worthy because you exist. So let's go back to these quotes I mentioned at the start. And that you will always be given the help you need. It is around you, but for people who don't think it is, you just got to look harder. But it's about working together. And he's one thing I suppose that jarred, because I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist, was about support political processes which encourage unity and diversity. I would just be wary about supporting any political processes, just because I'm all for encouraging unity and diversity, you know, in so many ways. But I think I just don't trust politicians really in general, whatever, even if their message seems on the face of it to be a good one. I would always be aware of any political process within this world, because it's been so corrupted by the people that shouldn't be. But yeah, he just also another quote, Neil Donald Walsh, what would love do now? So a positive message, I guess. So it's something that I would definitely go along with. But as I say, it sets the tone for a lot of the conference, which was about times are changing, to semi-quote Bob Dylan. And there is this reality shift, and how is it going to affect us, and how are we going to deal with it? So yeah, on to the next speaker, Jason Bray. Now, I confess I probably won't talk too much about Jason's talk, not because I didn't enjoy it. He's what's called a deliverance minister. So it's basically exorcisms that he performs, although I don't think that the Anglican Church like to refer to them as exorcisms. So deliverance minister is the official term. He's the Dean of Llandaff in Wales, been a vicar of Wrexham. So he related a number of stories where he got called to try and remove a ghost or something like that from a house, something that's people being haunted. And he related a few stories. He believed that poltergeists weren't ghosts. I think, you know, a lot of this would make sense to me in that, you know, I've heard before, I think paranormal experience, it comes in various different forms. So he said a poltergeist is not a ghost, but is caused by someone alive and present, most commonly teenagers. And the angst, if you like, of disrupted individuals, and, you know, quite often teenagers, it's like an energy, and it earths in physical objects. So that's when, you know, the poltergeist activity, you get things like objects flying across the room, things going bang in the night, basically. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, that it's around disruptions of energy. And it does make sense to me. Whether there's also, in some cases, there can be a multi-dimensional aspect to it, I don't know, but it does make sense to me that there is something about a disruption within living people that's causing these sort of energy fluctuations that's making things fly about. So it can also happen people with health scares, things like Alzheimer's, people in nursing homes. So I suppose where people are troubled, basically, and there's a disruption in energy, so something's, you know, shaken about, and then that's going to cause disruptions in the physical world around it. he wasn't convinced about Ouija boards. He didn't think that anything would be let through. So I suppose he doesn't, he definitely didn't talk about, or to my memory, he didn't talk about demons. So he some might say is quite typical of a sort of the modern sort of Anglican church, or, in this country, the sort of Church of England, that sort of thing. They don't really want to go into that idea of entities and things like that. It was interesting to me that he said ghostly phenomena often happens when in houses, say, when they're being restored, renovated. So if you like, the things are being shaken up, how the house used to be and moved about. I suppose in one way that's a bit of a reverse of the poltergeist idea, because it's something in the physical world that's being moved about, and that's disrupting, I suppose, a different kind of energy, maybe, and that's then causing some reverberations on a different frequency, if you like, in the other dimension of the spirit world, perhaps. Hi, Margaret, by the way, great to have you with us. Thank you for being here. Now, this is also mentioned in a later talk that I'll go through, Nick and Sarah Kyle. They also mentioned about houses being renovated and restored, and how that often brings about some sort of ghostly or paranormal occurrence. And that made me think, actually, in a way, though, in terms of us having a paradigm shift, or the reality layers being shaken up, because especially after what's happened in the last few years, this sort of idea of a reset, our whole world, our whole society is being restored, renovated in terms of what they're trying to do to it. They're mixing up so many different, or they're throwing out so many of the traditional ways of living, how things are, how our world is structured. And I think in a way that it's no surprise then that our whole society is becoming haunted. And I think I get into that a little bit when my book about the lost child, because so many, I mentioned about teenagers often being the subject of poltergeist activity. You get so many ghost story books, plays, films, so many of them involve children. Either there's a living child, like a teenager, that is where things happen around them, or it's a lost child, a child that died, and it's the ghost of the child that's haunting a place. And quite often it's a bit of both. There's a living child, and there's an interaction with a spirit child. So again, to me, what I was sort of getting at with the lost child, how it is a symptom of how these schisms and these breakdowns in reality and the fabrics of our world. And I think partly, that is maybe that something that is a natural thing, and we are sort of going into this different time when these things are happening, veils are thinning, that sort of thing. But also we know the powers that shouldn't be are trying to artificially shake things up and change the structure of our world, the physical world. And I think it makes sense to me that because they're doing that, that will then disrupt the energy, disrupt the energies, disrupt the frequencies, and that's going to mean a haunting that we all suffer. And I think we are all suffering a haunting of our world. So yeah, one you were saying quite often he obviously he's a priest, so he would invite Jesus to be present when he goes to a place, and he said often that is effective. The priest then buggers off, maybe just because he didn't want to be hanging around anymore with things like that going on. But he wasn't. He did own up to not always being successful, and he mentioned some family called him in. I think it was something like there was like a ghost of a person at the bottom of the stairs in the cellar, and apparently there, it was recorded that how many years ago there'd been a previous occupant of the house, and they had fallen down these stairs and killed themselves. And so there was a ghost basically at the bottom of the stairs that these people used to have to step over to get into the cellar. But apparently that didn't shift when he tried to do his deliverance. So the family just said, "Oh well, never mind. We'll just keep stepping over it then," and that's what they still do. So the mind boggles really, but I suppose you can get used to all sorts of things. I guess it wasn't a threatening or disruptive entity. Yes, my good wife, as she said, if people don't mind, if you could please thumbs up, share, subscribe. And we do have a Buy Me a Coffee now, shamelessly plugging. Just, if you were lovely and generous enough to want to bung us a quid for a coffee or something, that would be eternally grateful to help us with our things as we go forward. So on to the next speaker now, Jamie Arthur Pickup. Just briefly spoke to him. He was selling his books before Juliet got there. He briefly sold his books from the table next to Liz's. But very interesting guy, and he was, very down to earth, ordinary guy. Just maybe see down the pub or whatever. Not someone you'd associate with the esoteric, although you should never obviously judge anyone by the appearances. Good picture here with him in the pyramids in the background. But yeah, another person that had a change of life, had started to realize that reality was not as normally perceived and as he always thought it was, and started, I think only in the last few years, going into all these esoteric knowledge. And I was inspired to buy his book. Oh, there we go. Vitruvian Man, The Architect's Blueprint. He's written a previous book as well. But yeah, I was inspired to buy it. I just had a little look at it so far, but fascinating stuff. And it struck it struck chords with me straight away. And you might realize why if you see this, because he talked about the monad, and I've talked about this principle of this primary symbol, the circle, and with a dot in the middle, like so. An egg. Obviously, the circle is the unity of all things, and then you have, with a dot in the middle, it's like an egg. It's like the beginning of life, and it's the entirety of creation, the universe. So yeah, another shameless plug, but obviously I used that for as designed by Liz for my novel, for the cover. And so suddenly when he had this come up on his talk on the slideshow, I'm like, bloody hell, like, whoa, synchronicities, things are connecting. So where I again fall down in terms of Jamie goes into such detail about gematria ideas of the numbers within words and the numbers in terms of specifications of things like the Great Pyramids in Giza, so many great buildings around the world, and these ideas of that they are connected into, you know, sacred geometry and these different ratios, but also that people are signaling to us the powers that be, like Knights Templar, those sort of things. And where he, like with this particular, with the new book, he's going into Leonardo da Vinci. So this on the cover is like a representation from this Da Vinci's famous sort of diagram of man, where it's looking at these supposed to be these sort of the perfect proportions and that sort of thing. Obviously, I think this went out on the one of the satellites, didn't it? The Voyager ones that were sent out into space. So Jamie was talking about Da Vinci in the same way, and I thought when he said this, similar to how I think about Shakespeare, and lo and behold, also Jamie has also written and talked about Shakespeare. In both cases, saying that they weren't the person that history says they were. They weren't a single man, or maybe there was a person called Leonardo da Vinci, a person called William Shakespeare, but he wasn't on his own responsible for, in Da Vinci's case, all these incredible works of art. And of course, Da Vinci was such a Renaissance man, literally, but an incredible artist, but also in terms of like science and designing weapons of war. But Jamie, you know, talks about him being this sort of great architect figure, but again, in connection with the likes of the Freemasons and the Templars. So he was created, if you like, to be a figure putting out these symbolic works of art and things like that, again to encode, if you like, codes of our reality and how the building blocks of the world and how they're set up, and all this esoteric knowledge. But again, these things are hidden in codes which only a select few know about. So Jamie is obviously other people as well are trying to tap into that information, to learn that information, so that it can be passed out to the average person like me. Although I struggle to learn the numbers and retain them. But oh, sorry, Green Tea, I think I confused because I just went on a little bit. The man of the cloth, the priest guy, Jason Bray, that was a previous talk. So I am sorry, I probably didn't make it clear. So this is another chap who's not a man of the cloth, Jamie Arthur Pickup, who has written this stuff about the Da Vinci, but also, as I say, he's also written about Shakespeare, and again, more resonance and with things that I've talked about. John Dee, as regular viewers will know, I talked way back right at the start, early days of my talks about John Dee, and he's someone that's going to come into the new book, but connected with so many things in Shakespeare, with these also esoteric societies. This again, like Da Vinci, if he was a real person, a real polymath of knowledgeable about so many different forms of science, but also the esoteric world, the paranormal, alchemy, and this idea of the monad, this circle with the dot inside it. So he wrote Monas Hieroglyphica. I think that was quite early on, really, in his career, if you want to call it that, when he was out in Holland. I think he was the Netherlands, where he studied university for a while. But he designed this symbol, which is here on the front page of the book. And again, it's this. He said that this would be a symbol that people he thought could meditate on to, I suppose, a sort of increase in consciousness or knowledge. And sorry, I'm just getting to my right bit. I think, well, Jamie said it was based on some Egyptian knowledge. Again, these things have been passed through the Egyptians, but I think, going back further than that in a lot of cases. So this symbol, I do apologize, just gone too far there. Representing unity of all creation, influenced by celestial forces. He believed it contained the essence of alchemical transformation and spiritual evolution. And by meditating upon it, he aimed to access hidden knowledge transcending linguistic barriers. So that's interesting. This, obviously, my big thing is about language, but also what lies within language, which again is why a lot of Jamie's and one of the later talks, which I'll go on to, particularly struck a chord with me. So idea about what lies within language. So although the number side is difficult for me, but the gematria is fascinating when you've got letters that correspond to numbers. And so you've got all these number codes, but they can also be connected to words. But also there's an idea that beyond language, beyond words, you can't quite grasp some of the most deepest concepts, the deepest level of consciousness, if you like, because it's beyond language. Like also it's beyond material science in so many ways. So many things about the paranormal, it's like, oh, they don't exist because we can't measure it empirically. We can't quantify it. We can't. It won't show up on our sensors of our modern, unbelievable technological equipment. So therefore, it doesn't exist. But the thing is, if it's in a different paradigm, it's in a different dimension, then obviously it's not going to fit in and be measurable by conventional science. And also in the same sense as well, it can't be explained within language. With language is the building block of those things, in this sort of science and this way of structuring the world. But I think what interests me, and again what I refer back to in my book on the lost child, is I felt the lost child again was some sort of archetype, but it was also related to language, and that there was some essence within language which had been lost, this loss of meaning, and that was symbolized by the lost child. There was some within and behind language. There's this ground of all there is, whether you want to call it spirituality, some sort of ether out of which all matter forms. And if you want, in terms of language, you could look at it like as a blank page or a blank screen upon which the words are written. and the lost child is somehow in the spaces between those words, between the letters. So again, the silent child in books and films again is seen as sort of troubling, this idea of a reality where we can explain everything. So sorry, I've rambled on a little bit there, but I think I do like this idea, and it interests me that these bases of language comes into this magical writing, and so many the basis of our letters of like ideography, where they are the actual origins of letters were to do with like the most basic shapes that are the building blocks of the world, the sacred geometry. So we've got the circle, the line, the cross, the crescent, and obviously these are all connected as well to the bodies in space, the sun, the planets, the moon, represented by a crescent, and then you've got things that represent the physical world. So the egg, the cross. You've got the tree. You can go back into like things like the tree of life. So I can see, just without going deeply, where maybe he was going with these, all these most basic symbols and linking them up. And of course, it then gives you a figure which looks a bit of a humanoid figure. I suppose some might argue it's got horns, so there's some sort of demon element to it, but I wouldn't take it that way. But yeah, it's something that I want to look into more. So I think things that Jamie and other speakers in the conference opened up, something that's going to come into my research as well. But yeah, Dee was looking to merge astrology, alchemy, mysticism, and metaphysics. And this hieroglyphic monad serves as a visual manifestation of Dee's interconnected worldview. That wasn't a quote from Jamie, that was a quote from Wikipedia, I'm ashamed to say, but it's a good basis for, I think, further exploration into Dee. But yeah, I did do a talk early days, which is still available if we want to have a look on the old live streams going back through. So Jamie, he mentioned Aleister Crowley. He said he wasn't a bad man as he's made out to be. It's all about merging religion with science. And his phrase, "You are a star," which a lot of people have taken as being maybe like so many other people that sort of break the mold, if you like, or create new forms of belief. Their words can also be misinterpreted and taken the wrong way. And but yeah, "You are a star," a lot of people see that as being a basis where now it's like we have this celebration of fame and stars, like film stars, pop stars. And again, it's all around the idea of appearance. Surface appearance is everything. And they see Crowley's comment as encouraging that superficiality. But I think what Jamie was trying to get at is that it's more about star in a cosmic sense, and about every man and woman is a star. It's this idea that we can all access this light, this potentiality within us, and it's all about trying to access that. And a lot of that is with these different codes of reality, which the initiates, if you like, into a lot of these secret societies, which he's saying Da Vinci, or the people that were actually responsible for what Da Vinci came up with, they have this knowledge, but most of the rest of the people don't. So just as an aside, again, one of these things where I've written down quotes, but they sort of jump out at different places. But we were obviously listening to this talk in Glastonbury. He was saying Glastonbury tour is not the heart chakra of the world, as a number of people say, but the solar plexus. And then this transmits out energy along meridian lines to the rest of the world. Interesting, go back to the solar plexus in terms of the human and that being a source of energy in a couple of the later talks. But so as I always find on previous symposiums, and I'm sure it's not an accident. I'm sure Andy and the team who get the speakers together, they work it well. So there's interlocking themes there, but also I guess it's also just part of the zeitgeist of what's going on, and different people are picking up on things. But as I say, I was also struck by some little synchronicities with some of the speakers and what I've been looking at. I mean, look him up, Jamie Arthur. Pick up. He's got things there on Facebook and on the internet, and he's done other talks. And well, get his book. There we go. Yeah. He talks about the Last Supper. Now, again, I won't do any sort of justice to it, but he talks about it being, I suppose you can see when you do look at Jesus in the middle there, I suppose it is quite a strong triangular shape there, and he's talking about, and there being this other triangle between him and the next figure along, and he was talking about how that was an important symbolism, and it does also relate to the different figures on either side, and they all correspond to different things. Again, this live stream, if you like, is just so a review of talks, and hopefully inspiring people to dig into the research of the different speakers in their own sort of right, because I can't do justice to it all on this live stream. As I say, Jamie did go on a lot in terms of gematria and links different numbers, birthdays or significant dates when people died, and how they correspond with numbers relating to other things. It is difficult to keep track of all those, if you know what I mean, especially on a fairly short talk. But I do think at the base level, I think that there is definitely this encoding that has been done. So I think at the basis, I can see where he's going with that, and obviously a number of other people talked about these things, and it is obviously part of esotericism going back centuries. So it's admirable that people have got the ability to go into these things in detail. As I say, Jamie, I don't think had any, as far as I'm aware, any interest in any of these things until a few years ago. So it's incredible the amount of research that he's done in a short space of time. Jamie sort of referred to the ordo ab chaos, that to build a new structure, you need to bring down the old one. And that does seem to be what a lot of the powerful are trying to do at the moment. They're trying to break up our world so they can impose a different one. But obviously, I don't think we want one on their terms. And even if things were far from ideal on a lot of things about the old world, that was probably to do with people in power then, the same people. But also, you don't just break up things without some something positive to take over from it. So it was interesting as well. He made reference, I think I talked about John Dee, the fact that he was also a cartographer amongst his many other accomplishments. And Dee said that 77 degrees west is God's longitude, and I think that relates to North America. So that's why John Dee famously he coined the term empire for a start, but he was apparently the one that encouraged Elizabeth I that Britain should colonize America. Also at that time, True North was in the north of America, so this magnetic power of center. So it is interesting. I've talked and I write a bit in my new book, which is slowly coming along, about the importance of America. And it's interesting that, like with John Dee, that there was this draw to go there, and potential that a lot of people think that, well, we know people did go there a long time ago before Columbus, that the Vikings are said to have gone there, but also there's all these interesting stories about whether the Templars went there before. So many years before Columbus discovered. Obviously, I know there were people there anyway, but in terms of the European world, but it seems to make sense to me in some evidence that I've seen that that there was earlier contact there. So again, this maybe is where there would seem to be an important power thing there in America. So Mercator, who was a famous, I think he maybe the first world map, or the first one that's considered, like maybe a modern map that has things, very pretty much where we know they are now. That was he was a contemporary, or around the same time as Dee, and wrote to him in 1577. And again, just as an aside, it's quite interesting when you talk about symbolism and about lines, circles, about creating symbols which then define our reality. And when you think of a map and lines of longitude, latitude, these are ways of making a map is like a way of making the material world symbolic in a way, because it's representing with lines and symbols where things are in the physical world. So interesting to me that Dee was involved in that, as well as all the esoteric and the scientific side. It's all ways of defining reality, and language is a form of that. Mathematics obviously is like the building blocks of reality, but also just in this symbols, as I say, in just this way of drawing lines around the world to make it, to give it definition of, and sometimes of course the lines on a map to define where one country ends and one country begins, and as we know, people can just move those lines and create all sorts of upheaval for people that actually live in these places, and that's just because of an arbitrary shift of a line. But yeah, really fascinating guy, and I look forward to reading lots more, and I know it's going to feed into into my own research as well. Definitely, there's already some things that I'm sort of taking note of, which I definitely think is gonna come out in my own work. So on to the next speaker. So this was Fiona Robertson, who is or was, I think still is, probably a publisher, because Andy Thomas, who obviously presents and Green Tea, he might be a great guy to interview. Yes, good point. I did speak to him briefly, but I will thanks Margaret, thanks for popping in. But yes, I will reach out to him, and I would like to talk to him more. I've had exchanged a few words with another one of the speakers that I'm going to talk about in a moment, and he said he would come and do a talk, so I'll get to him later. But yeah, I think you're right. Jamie would also be a fascinating person to talk about, and the fact that there's overlaps with our own research, I think that would be really good. So good suggestion, Green Tea. I will try and follow that up. So as I say, Fiona is a publisher, and Andy was saying that she published a number of his books, but now she's written her own book about her love of standing stones, megalithic stone circles, those sort of things. Obviously, that is something that chimes with me as well. So again, this was something which was like a personal journey in terms of, so what I would say is, again, not to denigrate it in the slightest, I enjoyed the talk, but it wasn't, if you like some of the talks that see a megalithomania, and it's going into the ins and outs of how the incredible alignments of circles and where they originated from. I suppose Fiona's, a lot of it was a very personal experience with the stone circles of around the country. And here she is with one there. She recommended a book called The Old Stones, which is something that I probably shouldn't get to add to my pile of books. But the Megalithic Portal site is a site that I've looked at a few times. Oh yes, again, I need to. I'm been a bit naughty. Liz has reminded me there, because Green Tea was talking about Jamie speaking. Juliet Bryant, who I mentioned, talked about at the start. I say Liz talked a lot to her on the next shed, had the stalls next to each other. And Juliet has said that she will come, and I think with her husband Giles, to do a talk in the future on our channel as well. So watch this space. But yeah, that would be very exciting, because she, like I said, is a really great high energy speaker, and lots of amazing knowledge about plants, mushrooms, their healing properties, their effect on consciousness, that sort of thing. So apologies, didn't mention that earlier. So thanks, Liz, for the reminder. So this book, The Megalithic Portal, I haven't got this book, but I have looked at the Megalithic Portal before when I've been researching about stone circles, that sort of thing. So very interesting site. So, oh, gone too far. Right. Okay. So yeah, Fiona's, so it was a very, very personal and emotional talk in points, because she started by saying that her experience with stone started in Avebury, and of course that's a site which is close to us and close to our heart as well, because it was sort of like an early trip she did with her later husband. And tragically, she goes through the talk, she's was quite tearful, and very sadly her husband died not too long ago. So her book was, I suppose, a way of remembering some of the experiences they had together going round different megalithic sites. But she said as well, it was sort of a symbolic thing for her, in that the pure fact that these sites had survived for so many thousands of years, it was sort of like a sign of endurance, going through time and weathering storms, if you like, and coming out the other end. She mentioned a few things which I suppose familiar with from other talks, but influential people from past centuries looking at ancient sites like Albury, who again was first inspired by seeing Avebury, and his monumental Britannica influenced Stukely at a later time. And these brought stone circles to public attention. Part of it was sort of sensationalist stories about druids and human sacrifice. But in a lot of ways, as I've mentioned before, keep plugging my own talks, I know, but I'm going to keep doing it, so why not? Someone's got to do it. As you will know, and my wife will say with great sadness, that I keep banging on about stone circles. So, but yeah, I've talks about Avebury and about Stanton Drew, and they are unbelievable. They are unbelievable places, and they do still hold an energy. But it's so sad that for centuries they were at the best ignored, but of course in many of cases they were destroyed by people, whether it was just purely just to get some stone to use to building material, or in many cases for religious reasons, and they were seen as the work of the devil. Stones were destroyed, buried. She referred to one story which I found a little bit sad, but I suppose Beckhampton Avenue, I'm not 100% sure where that is. A lot of stones, it was like an avenue of stones, and they'd been buried, and they were uncovered, and there was apparently some sort of like local poll amongst the villagers about whether they get put back up in their rightful places or where they used to stand. But they voted to keep them buried, as people didn't want to disrupt the environment they had now. She said she understood that. And I suppose, if you lived in this environment and then suddenly stones pop up, it would change things for you. But to me, these are just unbelievable energy centers, really, connecting with what we've been talking about for. So, I always find it a bit sad, I mean, to me, if the stones are there and they found them buried, I would say they should be put back up in the place. But Fiona said the megalithic sites, they give a deeper perspective when the present seems threatening. So I suppose this idea of the ancient, and in this case the extremely ancient, is something that is outside time, because it's so far beyond our paradigm of our world now, though obviously more and more people now are concentrating it. And of course, so many people that I've done tours with and I've talked about, conferences we've been to, people maybe are more and more being drawn to these sites because they're aware that there was some great purpose to them, and they were about community aspect. Fiona mentioned, as I'd read, talking about Orkney, this around the Ring of Brodgar, and archaeologists believe now that the Ring of Brodgar may have been some sort of like a community activity, if you like, because stone was brought from different parts of the islands, so, and like different times. So there's a theory that sort of seems to be the enduring one now, that it was like different communities, whether actually competing amongst each other, or just like it's like a community aspect of the different communities having a stone and coming at different times, and the Ring of Bogar wasn't an engineered thing to be with, with certain alignments or something like that. It was more of a case of the experience of building it. So she was supposed, Fiona was talking about that again, in this idea of maybe it being a community thing of Neolithic times. I mean, it's interesting. I sort of written a bit about it in my book, which is still coming. I think that may be the case, but I think as well that there's, well, I don't want to give everything away in terms of things I've been writing about, but it seems to me, again, connected maybe partly with what I've been talking about in the previous talk with Jamie's, but it still seems to me that maybe, and this green tea mentioned Laird Scranton, and his theories about Orkney, and he was talking about it as being like a school, if you like, for whatever they were, this superior people, whether that's aliens or early advanced human civilization or something like that, that he was saying based in the Shetlands. Sorry, not the Shetlands, apologise, Faroe Islands, which is north of Orkney. But he was talking about Orkney, like where Skara Brae is, this community there, where this preserved Neolithic village. But he was talking about like it was almost like a school, and maybe that this then knowledge got passed down to go to places like the Middle East and things like that, so that rather than things coming from places like Göbekli Tepe and ending up somewhere like the Orkneys, that, or maybe at a certain different part of time, but that this was like a foundational school for passing down knowledge and passing down maybe agricultural knowledge. So perhaps these two things can be intertwined, in that maybe there was an aspect with things like the Ring of Bogar where there were different communities bringing the stones at different time, but perhaps that was all part of this education. And for me, I would say I still think that it's connected with a symbolic idea, again, of inscribing this symbolism on the landscape, and how this would then get passed on through ritual into symbols that then became eventually written language and went into the myths and building blocks of a reality. So to me, the rings of the stone circles and the pillars, the stones, again, you've got these basic symbols of the circle and the line, and that, to me, that's where I think these all go back to these beginnings of language. That's for me. That's where I'm sort of going with at the moment. And then that feeds into the things that we were talking about with Jamie's talk, maybe. Fiona feels stones have a consciousness, which I would agree with. And obviously you've probably seen that clip with me dowsing. Thanks for the rods again, Pete. Dowsing in Avebury, and the rods moving towards the stones, connecting with the stones, touching the stones. Yes, I think there's a consciousness there. Certainly there's energies there, and I think that all equates to the same thing. Fiona was saying so much we don't understand. Again, they're like symbols of this wonder in life. So actually going back to Orkney, she was saying, which makes sense, I suppose, again, that it would be in terms of the circles, alignments and things like that, with the seasons, the sun and the moon. In terms of the sun, obviously, again, in British terms, apart from the Shetland Islands, it's the furthest north. So it's the most extremes of light and dark. So you get 18 hours of either one, depending whether you're in, the middle of the summer or the middle of the winter. So maybe again it was an extreme place in terms of the light and dark. So that's again maybe why it had a prominence of a place where so many amazing Neolithic sites were. And she mentioned Maishau, the cairn or long barrow there, which is one of those where the winter solstice sun penetrates into inside the cavern when the first rays of the sun on the winter solstice. She was saying it used to be more pointy, which I've heard before, and then it sort of got broken into, and then excavations, and it's now more of a sort of just a like dome shape. But I think if it did have a pointier top, again, that's sort of tying into a sort of pyramid shape, and I certainly think that pyramids were an extension of these things like long barrows, the Neolithic sites of stone circles, those sort of things. Mention a little bit more of those later. And I quite liked, again, sort of following what I've just been saying, where my theories about these Neolithic sites being the beginnings, if you like, of symbolic representation on the landscape, or a sort of a humanity creating something in the symbolic shapes, which is part of when I talked about like the maps defining the world, and but also in a way there in terms of tapping into energies, energy flows, that sort of thing. But Fiona said the stones were a Neolithic book. So to me that chimed with what I'm thinking. That for them that was that their book. It was a way of recording things, passing on knowledge, obviously in terms of how the way it sort of tracked the movement of the sun and the moon and other stars, maybe in terms of the seasons. There was a connection between the sky and the earth. But yeah, that I quite like that term, a Neolithic book, because to me it strikes with my sort of thinking about this being this beginnings of symbolism that became language and passing all those ideas on. So, but yeah, very emotional, obviously very sad. Her partner passed away, so it was a very a personal journey, if you like, there. So next talk, Ian Simpson now. Just to read what the quote on the symposium website for his sort of blurb, if you like, about him and his area. He says he woke up in April 2013, very quickly realized that what was happening with weather modification in our skies was deeply disturbing and had to be investigated and exposed. At that time, very few people knew about this subject, and the information online was scant. At that time, very few people knew about this subject, and the information online was unscientific and unsatisfactory. So I promptly sold my house, created my website, bought cameras, and went on the road. In 2017, I was forced out of my university job and had to abandon my campaign, but this topic has really blown up recently. So last year, I decided to come out of semi-retirement. I consider myself to be the most advanced researcher in terms of understanding the equipment used for weather modification and its global infrastructure, and have made many world first discoveries. So he's bigging himself up there, but then probably quite justified. So his website is lookup.org.uk. And again, like all the talks, I did find it very interesting. And this is something, we posted. We went to geoengineering, anti-geoengineering protest in London recently. So it is something that's very much it's got prominence because of things. I know in America there's been some states that have made it illegal, which is great. Although I think Jason Burmas, amongst others, has talked about how it's difficult to follow through with these things, even if a state makes things illegal, because obviously if you're talking about planes and they could be flying from God knows where. So it's difficult to police, of course. But also there's the thing where the British government, it's one of these things where they've obviously been doing a little drip. Notice things in like the BBC headlines like, obviously chemtrails is just a stupid conspiracy theory, but perhaps it could actually be a good thing. Maybe it could actually be what we need to avert the climate crisis. So, on the one hand, it's saying, people would believe that this is a thing, a ridiculous, stupid conspiracy theory, but but actually, well, yeah, it is a thing, and it's a good thing, So, and then the British government did this thing where they talked about a program where they're going to, trial doing some geoengineering to help reduce the effect of, global warming, climate change, that sort of thing. So again, it's the kind of thing where they're saying, we might trial doing something which they've actually been doing for God knows how long. But it's an acknowledgement that at least where people have laughed at people like us and said it's obviously ridiculous, they'd never do that, and now things like this government statement are, well, they've said they can do that, and they've said they're going to do that, so that at least puts those out of the equation. And so yeah, it's become more in prominence from that point of view. Weird noises, trains going through the tunnel. I don't even notice it anymore, but we've got our own parallel universe going on here, and that's probably not a lie. So I was obviously sympathetic with Ian's talk from the beginning. There were some things which I was a little bit surprised at, though, in terms of, well, he reckoned, well, it came up in a question at the end, and he said 90% of spraying is from commercial planes. And that didn't seem to tally. I mean, just in terms of going out in our village and seeing planes sort of crisscrossing, and what you see in the picture there, coming out of there, streaming behind them, and then that whole thing of like the just staying there, not dissipating, and then thickening out, and before you know it, the whole sky is all overcast. But the planes where I've seen with my own eyes do it here look very much, well, they're smaller planes, and they look, maybe military, but quite modern planes, but smaller planes, not like the commercial airliners, which you do see sort of coming up, crossing the distance. But, you know, obviously we're not a million miles away from Bristol Airport, so international flights going there, and they seem higher up, and you don't see the clouds coming out of them so much. So, and that's one of the things where, you know, quite often like skeptics would say, oh, what you think all these commercial airlines are spewing this stuff out, that's crazy. And I would have said as an answer to that, well, no, I don't think it's coming from those. I think it's other flights. That could be a point, Green Tea. I was wondering about that. Green Tea puts, it's been suggested by someone high up that they're now putting something in a lot of the commercial fuel. That seems to make more sense to me. So if it's just stuff that's in the fuel that commercial planes are using, then it's not a case of someone deliberately having to install equipment and separate tanks for whatever it may be. We're going to get flagged for a disinformation thing on this on this tool, can't we? I expect, but one of those little warning boxes, they're really a badge of honor, aren't they? Really, just to show that we're obviously speaking the truth if they come up on YouTube. I mean, Ian was talking about, he showed a picture of these pylon pipes at the sort of the rear bottom of these sort of Airbus planes. And if you look at his website, he has got a lot of stuff on there. And there's some things with communication with like aircraft manufacturers. And he was saying how I think that he couldn't see that they had these pipes fitted in with the specifications, like the official stuff about how these planes were built and things like that, technical stuff, which, you know, I'm not going to say he's wrong, because he's obviously researched it for a long time. But the official thing about these pipes, I think, is that they're there just to, you know, excess liquid to drain away, so it's not causing a problem on the aircraft or something like that. So, but he you know, yeah, he's sort of putting forward the position, you know, and he talked about filming people, I think, at an airport in Turkey, and it was, you know, he could see people putting this tank in like the part of the luggage area. So he, you know, he's very much, you know, in an answer to a question as well, that, you know, very much there's people that are involved with putting these things on all these commercial aircrafts to do this spraying. And I don't know, they just didn't. I definitely think it's a thing, 100%. But I was surprised that that's how he said it was being done, to be honest. But I mean, he did, I think, say that there were various different kinds of geoengineering, so it wasn't limited to one particular kind. He was saying a lot of these flights come from Central Europe, and looking on his website as well, talking about how so many flights are diverted, so they end up going over London, even if they didn't really need to. So again, you know, it's stuff to check out. I definitely, you know, recommend having a look at his website, because he has been doing it a long time, as mentioned, and has gone all over the world. And it does seem that he's put a lot of time and energy into these things. So again, I'm not in a place to just dismiss it and say it's not right. He talks about cell towers and how they're involved with charging up the atmosphere, which has then, you know, which has had the particles put in it. Saying you don't see things like in the picture over the sea unless things like offshore wind farms are there. There's interesting things. He was talking about organic red wine he was recommending, which I suppose is not the worst thing, in terms of, he's saying, like, talking about gargling to clear stuff from the back of your throat, and brushing your tongue every day to get microplastic fibers off it. Drinking hot tea, he said. Another point, he talked about craft beer being a good thing because it's got silica in it, apparently, and that helps to remove aluminium. That's something I remember reading an article by Professor Christopher Exley, who's an interesting guy that got his career ruined and kicked out of his university, even though he'd been studying aluminium for decades and was considered Mr. Aluminium but when he started talking about them in terms of, well, this is before the lockdown of the recent years, but he was talking about being in other injections, aluminium, and how things like autism, Alzheimer's, that sort of thing. And obviously for that, he got completely ripped apart. But I remember him talking about silica and certain types of water that has silica in, and that can help to clean the body of heavy metals like aluminium. So yeah, Ian also recommended the site geoengineering.com. Now, the second part we talk, don't really want to go into too much detail, especially on YouTube, because I'll probably get kicked off. But he was trying to go into the second part about who's doing this. So he was trying to get into who are these powers that shouldn't be. And he was talking about bloodlines. It's like a lot of people were, but he was talking about rhesus negative blood group. Now, it was interesting. He was talking about a number of different groups, going back to things like the Phoenicians, talking about Templars. A lot of these things other people have talked about. But it was quite interesting. He was talking about often coastal regions. I suppose Phoenicians very much about seafaring trade and supposed to, influence far and wide through their seafaring ability. It's about Vikings, similar. Templars, interestingly, something I think look into more, whether they're connected with piracy and things like that. But anyway, sorry, I digress. But a number of different groups that he was saying have this concentration, and whether that's again going to this idea of, we talked about Morabilino, and idea of a number of people where they talked about this idea of, again, the sort of ancient alien idea, Book of Enoch, about there being alien race, and about them, again, I mentioned it earlier, about genetic modification. So he's talking about whether there might be different, a specific type, but I suppose it's interesting in a way because he's not talking about one specific race. He mentioned various different kinds of people, but all linked, he says, with this blood group, but certain characteristics, things like that, and that maybe a number of these are disposed to power, and they run the sort of power systems that are responsible for things like geoengineering. Some interesting ideas. Now, one of these things, which I can't talk about too much, especially on YouTube, but it is interesting in terms of, obviously these are ancient Hindu symbols, but it's shocking nowadays in Western eyes particularly to see these symbols side by side, because obviously they've been given connotations of particular races of people and grouping states and things that they've been responsible for, but they would be considered complete anathema and opposite tribes, if you like. But I would say I think it does make sense to me. It's sort of like a 1984 thing, the idea where you've got these three different blocks or I can't remember what exact word they use in 1984, but it's like the whole thing, oh, we're allied with this bloc against this other bloc, and then overnight they change and, oh, no, they've always been our enemy, and we're allied with this one now against this, you know. But really, the powerful of all these three, they're all in cahoots, and it's just like a perpetual war just to manipulate the masses. And to me, that's what all of these things are at the heart of it. It's, and sadly it's obviously going along now, and not just as well in terms of states, but in terms of the manipulation of people within our countries, and how you see all these fighting on the streets now. You know, this last few days have been in Britain, you know, there's been lots of stuff in the news about the pro-Palestine protesters being arrested, and then of course the stuff about immigrant migrant hotels and the protests there. On the face of it, you've got two groups who are completely opposed to each other, but I think a lot of this, it's all being manipulated again. And I think well, yeah, I know most of you know this kind of stuff anyway, but I've jumped ahead too far. But yeah, I mean, I just thought that is quite an image to have together. I think it's the one that's now the Star of David is, I think, Shikona or something. The Hindu name for the symbol. I think there was a good attempt in terms of, in many ways, it was interesting what that Ian Simpson was saying. If food for thought. Interesting, he mentioned the Cathars along with these groups of this elites, because the Cathars were, you know, all but wiped out in the Crusade, because they were seen as being heretics. So it's not, I don't think necessarily he's saying that even that all of these people are powerful. Some of them maybe have been persecuted because they've got some extra knowledge or some extra connection. But yeah, I think there is something in terms of bloodlines, in terms of certain families or people that try and, through the years, maintain control along against the others. But I suppose, not that his talk was about this, but I've just landed on this again. These again are symbols, and it just shows how these very basic symbols, and I mentioned, you know, in Jamie Arthur Pickup's talk, where he was talking about the triangles encoded in The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. And I think on one of the pictures on Jamie's website, you know, it actually has this Shikona there, you know, in terms of the triangle. So it's just another example of how these symbols encode, or have been used, and are still being used. Not just words, we know those can be manipulated, but also just literally the symbols. They can change their meaning. They can be used as a way of control and manipulation. So that again is a reality code, but it's a way of it's something we have to be knowledgeable of. Again, it's knowing what they do with these symbols and how they manipulate us, to have the knowledge, to see through what they're doing with it, but to then to use it for those positive things which you and Mockery was talking about, in terms of accessing a higher consciousness ourselves, for us to make our positive effect on our reality and the reality around us, but not not allow them to cage us with their symbols. Liz, yeah, Oceania, Eurasia, East Asia were the three different sort of states within 1984. So yeah, to move on to Andy Thomas's talk next. So good old Andy Thomas. Sorry, Andy, not old, obviously, but of course, Andy, a legend, such a great speaker, and of course also involved for many years with the symposium in terms of organisation of the speakers and the MC, the main presenter between the talks, but always does the Saturday morning talk himself as well. So this is his new book. So again, as I say, this theme, if you say, not in terms of every speaker, but as a general theme, I would say certainly overlapping. But let's face it, I suppose it would go for many conferences in our sort of world in the past anyway. But this idea of reality not being what we always thought it was, it's becoming more into the normal world. And what Andy's talk, I mean, his book is about paranormal experiences, his own, and looking at other cases in general. But what he was saying in his talk in the symposium was that, I mean, he was talking a bit about those, but also just this idea that reality itself is breaking down, things are changing, and so that everything is becoming strange. So whereas before it was like, oh, this is normal everyday stuff, and then there might be a weird occurrence in someone's like, wow, what was that about? But now just on a level in terms of the political sphere, everything is becoming strange. And as Andy said, there's no line in the sand anymore. It's not, you can't just say, oh, that, the old perceptions, like I said before, about a sort of the house being renovated, everything's getting thrown out and changed about. Nothing is what it was. So everything's strange. So in that world, again, it's possibilities and reality is being bent around. I mentioned a couple of things. Jeff Stray, good, who was there but not talking on this conference, talked before about Chartres Cathedral, but he, I think, did a book Beyond 2012. Obviously, that was a time when a lot of people spoke about there being a shift, in terms of the Mayan calendar, an end of or some sort of shift to a new era. He talks about Terence McKenna. His name pops up quite a few times, different talks. He did, I think with someone else, did a chart of the strange. And just, certain events and how, sort of like a bit of like a strangeometer when it's on the graph, something outside normal perception or understanding. But it was sort of like after 2012, he predicted that nothing would be novel anymore. So again, it's this idea that our old notions of things remaining the same is being done away with. Just popped into my head there. It's just a thing, like just thinking like in Bath and getting the bus home, and there's buildings that you pass and they've got things engraved in the stonework, like I can't even think now, but what that building used to be, like a particular kind of shop or factory or something like that. But it's actually engraved into the stonework, and now it's just nothing like what it was before. It's just a random shop there. But the fact that it used to be engraved in stone, and it's still there engraved in stone, they can't change that because they'd have to like actually take whole lumps of the building out. but this idea that something used to be so permanent that it was engraved in stone, this building will always be a bank, it will always be a greengrocer's, whatever it was. But in our world, shops stay a place for 5 minutes and then they shut down. There's got there's no permanence, and things have this superficiality and they change things. Just a thing that popped into my head. But yeah, in this changing world, obviously it's very scary. It can be. He showed these some amazing pictures. This isn't one of his pictures, but it's somewhere the place that he showed. He and his wife went on holiday recently to this Lucius Gorge in Greece, which looks like an amazing place to visit. So I don't know if anyone's been there, but it's like a spectacularly beautiful. So it's a bit of like a gorge, and it's sort of a fairly cut off place from surrounding. And there's these monasteries that are still monasteries now that are places you get in Tibet and that, when you've got these, well, and some I saw in Turkey, actually in Cappadocia, but where you have them literally carved out of a mountain or cliff face or something like that. So the reason that Andy was talking about this, he was saying this was traditionally a place where people would retreat, like they go to these monasteries, and he was talking about when there were times of great turbulence and great maybe wars or big social upheavals in the areas around, people would flee and go to this gorge and maybe go into the monasteries, and it was a place of hiding away from this shift in the world that people had previously known. And he was saying, well, that's an option. And some people, talk about, I want to just run away and try and live some remote place away from this world that's going more and more crazy, and get away from it. And that's obviously an option that some people have. Other people try and deal with it in a different way. I mean, well, this is a monastery. There's a funny story where he said he was taking a photograph similar to this, I think, sort of this monastery on the cliff, and he was like, he was saying to his wife, "Oh, that's nice. This monk's waving to us." And then she said, "No, he's saying don't take any photographs. You're not allowed to take any photographs." But yeah, talking about a monastery, Christianity, and he mentioned how a number of truth seekers have been drawn recently to Christianity, and that's their way of trying to find some light amongst all the darkness there is in the world now. I mean, I would say, as things I've listened to with Liz, and I think maybe there is a case to be said that for some of these people that have, especially when you've got people like Russell Brand and that have suddenly converted to Christianity, I'm suspicious, shall we say. And could it be another sort of controlled opposition type of thing, where they're trying to, I think David Icke's talked about this amongst others, that he's sort of saying, why these people that are supposedly about truth and about fighting totalitarianism, censorship, all these things that have been done to us, why are they then going into accepting a religious belief system, an organized religion that has often, or tradition, it's got all these structures that are themselves hierarchical and have been involved with all these oppressions over the centuries as well. You're just going from one form of dictatorship or a belief system of control to another. So, but as Green Tea says, there's not many places you can run away to these days. The depository. That's right. Yeah, that's the word I was trying to find, Liz. Yeah, the car stopped outside there last week. Looked up and saw it, and literally thought it was always going to be a depository. Yeah, it's funny that you saw that. It just popped into my head. But yeah, obviously around Bath there's old buildings, but yeah, it's just the idea that they had it carved in there, and it will always be that. It's, you know, set in stone. It's set in stone. There's that goes into words. You know, Andy was saying, why don't they turn to Greek gods? Actually, there's a kind of thing that No More News talked about. You know, go back to the pagan gods. But the Abrahamic religions say the pagan gods are evil. But as Andy pointed out, they're basically were all around at the same time. So it's just another belief system. If you want something to cope with a different way of reality. So let me just see what we've got in the next picture. Oh, I've jumped ahead again. My apologies. So he mentioned a book of Roman history at the time, Suetonius, the 12 Caesars, which talks about all these different emperors in the Roman Empire and all these different intrigues and machinations and, you know, changes in dynasties between these different leaders. And he's saying, you know, you read it and it's basically, again, not much different to today. You know, all these political intrigues, and you've got these different leaders, and, you know, go from one to the other, and they've got all these scandals, and he's saying also not much different to now. There's all about, in this 12 Caesars book, the Roman Empire, it's all about all these portents and auguries. So they see things in the natural world that they say, oh, you know, where it's a comet in the sky or something like that, and they're looking for these things, and that's going to be symbolic of something going wrong or something changing. And as Andy said, that is also happening now. And I mean, there's lots of these things that you get on YouTube, placed on the internet, and yeah, I mean, the things like, I don't know if you've heard it, you can find it if you do a search. Things like these incredible, like we hear these sounds of trumpets, like really loud sounds of trumpets, and people are like, what the hell's that? And no real explanation of what's caused it. And of course, then that resonates with sort of things like biblical prophecies, like, you know, hearing the sound of trumpets and it's going to herald day of judgment and things like that. There's great amazing footage you can get on the internet as well. That I think in China they've like a double sun, so that gets into interesting stuff, Crow 777 and things like that. People say, oh, you know, there's an explanation, it's something about light refracting in ice particles or something in the clouds, so it gives the appearance like there's two suns, but it's actually only, you know, one's just like a reflection of the real sun. But yeah, double sun. So anyway, the point being that there's all these weird things happening, weird phenomena, and people are seeing it again as being portents of things changing in the world. And as Andy said, you can't tell for sure these days when some of these things are fakery. But, you know, well, there's the whole, it can be faked on the internet, on film, but also increasingly we know there are things with holograms, and, well, going back to what I talked about with geoengineering, there's ways of faking these things in the sky. So we've got all these strange anomalies. And again, I think that there probably is a case where they're doing these things deliberately, because again, they're trying to show things of a certain narrative that are playing out, and they're wanting to keep people in fear. They're wanting to, this idea of an apocalypse. So a change of reality, but not a positive one. They're wanting to keep it in mind that there's going to be a catastrophic one, maybe. I wondered, not that I've looked at Netflix recently, but there seem to be so many, especially like their own made shows that were about dystopia and apocalypse and things like that. And to me, it just seems another sort of predictive programming type of idea. But yeah, people are still looking for signs. They're, so people turning to Christianity, but other things as well. And, you know, I suppose, you know, a lot of people maybe in our way of thinking that we know, turning to paganism, looking, you know, like I mentioned about the stone circles, looking at pre all the organized religions that we know of, although again, there may be knowledge that I think probably is like a stream of knowledge that's come through all these centuries, but looking for stuff much further back and trying to get back to, in a way, ground yourself in history, or maybe as something that goes back, when I was saying, to the origins of language, or before or pre the symbols that define us now, something further and further back, and they keep looking for something else. But yeah, Andy said, you know, he is this I think he's got one of these things where he is he's sort of a go-to conspiracy theorist, woo type speaker, because, you know, he's a great guy, he's a great speaker, and he maybe he I don't say sugarcoats things, but he doesn't maybe go really deep down and dirty with some things. So he does a lot of presentations. He's very in demand as a speaker, and he does a lot of presentations for what you would call normie groups, you know, the Women's Institute type things, you know, groups of people that aren't normally interested in these things, or, you know, aren't part of a truth seekers community. But I mean, you know, that's good, you know, that he's, if you like, the acceptable face of that. He gets on sort of national media a lot as well, but it still is getting these ideas out there to people that wouldn't normally see and hear these things. But as part of that, because he goes to a lot and speaks a lot to these people who aren't, if you like, in our world where this is something that they're immersed in, but because he's like, if you like, the sort of this sort of person from the woo world, the people suddenly, you know, they feel comfortable talking to him, which maybe they've revealed to him, you know, oh, you know, I had this and that strange experience, you know, whatever it may be, paranormal, UFO, and it's something they have never told anyone else, but because they probably in fear that they'd be, you know, laughed at maybe, or something like that. But with you know, they can say something like that to him. But again, it does show that so many people do have these experiences, and maybe in a lot of cases they just don't want to share it because it's that they think it'd be laughed at. So yeah, Andy related some personal experiences he mentions in the book that he hadn't spoken about publicly before. Something, you know, he was in holiday in a caravan in the West Country, and they kept hearing the kids' voices, but there, you know, there were no kids around. And there's you can find it on the internet. He got national press exposure, if you like, on the internet anyway, when the Daily Mail website. You can look at these things on his the Truth Agenda and his website, and it's got links to these things. But yeah, it's quite a fascinating story. It reminded me a bit of Andy Peake, where he I think it was when he was a child, and he was, I think, on holiday with his parents, his granddad had been ill for some time, so it was accepted that he wouldn't live a lot longer, but they thought he was going to be living a little while longer, so they were away somewhere else. And he said he like woke up and he saw his mother sort of coming down the path towards where they were staying, and he knew, oh no, you know, he maybe saw the look on her face and he was like, oh no, granddad's died. His mum got there to the house, and yes, his granddad had died. Everyone was, you know, obviously in tears, very sad. And then he woke up, and then he saw his mum walking down the path. So, and it was an exact repeat of what he just dreamt or had a vision of, and it then played out in reality is exactly how he had just seen it in his mind. He said on the when it was like on the website, and he's saying, oh, a lot, you know, there was a lot of dismissive comments, as you can imagine, from cynics and things like that, saying, oh well, yeah, obviously you know, you knew your granddad was ill and was going to die, so it's not surprising you had a dream that he died, you know. But the point was, it was literally minute for minute he experienced what was going to happen in the future, and then woke up and it actually happened. So so yeah, quite the very powerful personal experience of his, you know. But he mentioned there's another thing as well. Again, it would be very interesting to look at. He said he's put up 3 of his earlier books. You can get them for free on his Truth Agenda website as a PDF. He thought he'd put them up for free because they talk about things which he talks about in this new book, which is again what you would say a paranormal experience. And he had spoken about it before when we heard him in the symposium. So he was very involved with crop circles. Again, the symposium used to just be a crop circle, purely crop circle conference, and that was like a lot of people. I think you too, Whisperoon. Crop circles was sort of something that drew people into the esoteric world, or to things not being as you would think in the material. And he was saying in the 1990s, Andy was in a group, and he was trying to do an experiment to interact with crop circles. And they had a meeting in a house, and they were talking about, they were imagining like a configuration of a crop circle that they would make, or that they were just imagining how this crop circle would look. And the next day, the crop circle appeared right next to the house where they'd been talking about it and having this configuration in their minds. And this crop circle appeared exactly how they imagined it, right next to their house. So just and that's talked about in these books, which you can get for free through his website, which will be very interesting to look at, but quite incredible. So yeah, another really great talk, but you know, very much this idea of the barriers of reality thinning or changing or becoming malleable, and things crossing over, and things in a material day-to-day world not being as they used to be and being completely changed, but also on another dimensional level. The paranormal experiences which show, if you like, a crossing over dimensions, or you can see things in different levels of reality. Now, I mean, this is very much similar to our dear friend Nick Hayes, who also was a speaker at the symposium, did a brilliant talk, as you would expect. This is just a photo I took of him on stage, and with one of his amazing photographs from the infrared of these skyfish type objects, or these biological life forms, as he believes them to be, which you can capture in the infrared and ultraviolet, which seem to be moving through the same space as us, but only, or not normally visible in the spectrum of light that we can see. But again, showing this thin, or well, non-existent really, barrier between. It's not a barrier. I think this is showing really that the dimensions are all, everything is always there together as one thing, and the definitions, it's like this consciousness thing of like quantum mechanics, where we perceive things to create the boundary, if you like, around them, so they get shown as a physical reality, but in actual fact everything is flow of energy. I won't go through Nick's talk, because we'll put a link in the chat. If you haven't already, please do check out where Nick very kindly did a talk on our channel, a really brilliant live stream, and he was able, because he had longer, the talks at the symposium are generally about an hour, so he had to sort of keep things, compress things, but he was able to talk for a lot longer on our channel, and obviously so more slides than he was able to do at the symposium. So if you haven't already seen it, I will recommend you go over and well, not right now, but have a look at Nick's talk with us. So I'll let him do his own talk for himself. But yeah, another brilliant presentation. We had the honor of selling some of his books from our stall, for Lizzie's stall. But yeah, have a look at Nick's Quest for the Invisibles website as well, for many great images. So next speaker up, Debbie Cartwright. Now, Debbie's name I knew of because she's a friend of Andrew Collins, and it was great that Andrew was there, not talking, but at the symposium watching Debbie, and it was great. We got to spend a bit of time to him, had a drink with him and Debbie afterwards, and Graham Phillips, who other people will know. I think Green Tea, you mentioned him on a previous chat. Had people heard of Graham Phillips? To my ignorance and embarrassment, I wasn't familiar with his work at the time, but I had the pleasure of meeting him at the symposium with Andrew Collins and Debbie. They're all part of this questing group. They've got a questing thing on Facebook. So Debbie is a psychic. Andrew mentioned her a lot in terms of the influence. I think I've mentioned her as well when I've done my talks about Andrew's work. So she was, I mean, Andy's, very into the scientific side, and again, one of these people who will look at all these numbers and specifications for things, incredible levels of research, but which I think is great. He also is very accepting that there's these other levels of reality and perception, and so he does work with Debbie over the years and other psychics as well. And he did say that, like, he'd been to Turkey and looking at other ancient sites, and had been around Göbekli Tepe when it was still just like a mound with some things just like poking up out of the dirt. Debbie, and she was like, wow, you need to go back there. There's something more there. And she felt psychically connections with various things. So she was has been very influential. So there's lots of interesting stories in terms of her involvement with Andrew Collins and and Graham Phillips and the various questing things that they've done. So questing is this interaction with the landscape, and I suppose it's also interacting with the past and the ancestors in a way, and picking up resonances or connections with things that have happened before. Now, I need to. Sorry, I'm jumping from one thing to another. I'm multimediaing here, so I've got. To apologize. Some of my things I've got notes on the computer. Some I've got notes on my notebook. So yes, Risperoon talking about the Greenstone affair, which Graham was having involved. I've seen on Facebook he's got some conference, like an anniversary of this Greenstone thing. It's not something I'm familiar with. I really want to go back and look at and get Andrew Collins' books that he wrote around all this questing idea. It's fascinating to me, and it's one of these things I'm going to catch up on. But yeah, Graham was also hilarious in the pub. But yeah, if you are interested in that Greenstone thing, look into Graham Phillips stuff. But yeah, Risperoon, I know he's posted something soon, unless it's already passed, but I know I've seen something recently about on Facebook that he's got some anniversary conference lined up. So Debbie, apart from being a psychic, she's also studied phenomenology, and she wrote a book called The Inward Revolution. So looking at from a psychological and psychic point of view about people's growth and where they can heal themselves, that sort of thing. But sorry, just trying to get my thing working. So, as I mentioned, that she was she'd advised Andrew in terms of the early days before the whole Tas Tepler sites, all these Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, all these amazing sites, which I had the pleasure of going out to visit. You may have seen some of my videos. But she's also since been out there as well with Andrew, and Andrew and Debbie are doing a Megalithomania tour to Egypt, I think in February of next year, which will be amazing. And it's going to be different to the kind of tours like when I went on, because they are planning on doing a quest, and I think it's tied up around the ideas of these caverns that have been, which obviously Andrew discovered, the Cave of the Birds I've talked about before, but obviously all these the Italian scientists who found all these imaging, which have found what they say is all evidence of all these massive caverns beneath the pyramids of Giza. But anyway, yeah, they're planning for this to be sort of a different tour in terms of it being like a questing thing, as well as not just a case of just going around the sites. Oh, here's this and that and the other. I think it's really trying to follow these psychic connections to try and get an idea of why these things were built and how these things were built, and following along. So she said it's no longer in dispute, and it's been accepted by a lot of the conventional archaeologists, which don't always see eye to eye with people that I tend to follow, but that shamanism was at the heart of the Tas-Tepler culture. Shamanism has often been scoffed at in the past, and it's been also oppressed by lots of different states, organized religions, whatever it may be. But it's been seen, it's been sort of animism has been seen as a primitive belief system, and it's a sign of the less developed kind of peoples. Again, Terence McKenna, Debbie quoted, he talked about shamanism being practical, spiritual, and psychotherapeutic techniques. Goes back to the very origin of human civilization. Blavatsky talked about everything in the universe throughout all kingdoms is conscious. I mentioned Fiona Robertson talking about the stone circles being conscious, and also Juliet Bryant talking about plants, mushrooms having a consciousness. Everything has its own plane of perception. So animism, there's no distinction between noumena, mind, and phenomena, world, the spiritual and the physical. But shamanism is not a religion as such, it's a method. And it was a very practical thing, as well as being a connection with the spiritual. The shaman in tribes, he would be the healer of living people within the village. He would be a guide for the dead when people died, a guide of their spirit going to the other world. He would be a communicator with external consciousness as a form of spirit, a negotiator, maintaining an ecological balance, so connected with the earth and the environment. And there would be things like hunting covenants, where there'd be like they would connect with the spirit of these animals, and it would be like, will you offer us up your body so we can eat in this hunting expedition. That's interesting. Green Tea in the telepathy tape says one boy who can feel the energy of stones. I would love to see him sponsored and taken to a few stone circles. It would be fascinating. That is very interesting. I just started to listen to some of the telepathy tapes, and it is really fascinating and connects up with these ideas, like in my novel, of this idea of people that don't communicate through language and they just purely telepathy. And again, through symbols, numbers, rather than words. But yeah, shamans, they were dreamers of dreams. So they could find ways to avoid a crisis that was coming up. They would be able to communicate with different kinds of consciousness and spirits to gain knowledge. They could also divine where a location or place of importance to investigate, or foretell the future, or show the past. And Debbie was saying, I think that they use this consciousness, maybe to divine where places were built, these megalithic sites. So again, it does all connect up with Juliet's talk, because a lot of the time, not all of the time, but psychoactive substances like mushrooms were used, different kinds of plants, mushrooms, to aid in this process. But again, I suppose the important thing is, in those days, it would be it would either be the shaman, and that these shaman in this place would go through, well, pretty much a lifetime, or decades, 20 years, more of training to be able to do what they did. So I think quite often in these societies, it would be the shaman that would go on his journeys, maybe take substances, or they would guide other people in the communities through these experiences. So I guess now what we've got, we've not got the natural substances of before. We've got, stuff that's been mixed with chemicals and manufactured, and it's lost any of the positive things and just exacerbated the negative side of things. But also people have taken these things without any training or guidance, and it's so often just led to destruction, as Liz knows only too well from the work she used to do. Debbie mentioned a few examples of shaman that have sort of survived into the modern world. So this is Maria Amancina. Apologies to her if I've mispronounced her name, but that's a great photo with it. So this is around the Siberia area, and obviously the shamanism is it's a rich area for shamanism going back centuries. And again, I refer back to the talk I did on Andrew Collins, Cygnus Key, and he believed that the Tastepla culture was the people that built those sites like Göbekli Tepe. They had come down from the region around Central Asia, around Siberia, and were people that brought this shamanistic culture, and that a lot of the rituals, beliefs, practices, symbols that then evolved into these megalithic sites came from the shamanism in this area. So as Debbie said, there's a real link with shaman 12,000 years ago, and it's a continuous line, if you like, to the Tastepla culture, the people that built those sites like Göbekli Tepe. So obviously Siberia, well, it still is part of Russia, but under the Soviet era, it was forbidden. So in this area, it's passed down through the female line, shamanism. So this particular lady, shared her story. She realized at a young age that she could cure people and see into the future. She became famous in Siberia. I think there's a book, The Spirit of All Time. She was saying, Debbie was relating the story. I think that this woman, she had a dream when she was young, like this white-haired, bearded figure. Not me. Wonder of a volcano that was going to happen in the area, a repercussion. That's Siberian Ice Maiden, a Bronze Age princess. A body had been taken, I think, to a museum somewhere in Russia, I guess. And she was told to do certain practices in this dream, that she told to do certain practices over a period of time, followed different rituals, different behaviors to try and avert a cataclysm. And there was an earthquake later on in 2003 in this area, but no one died. So it's attributed to the fact that she had this premonition and did these practices that she was told to. But yeah, now this scary looking dude, he looked absolutely terrifying. So this is I think Otia Boo. from the Banjol Monglory, and now this a form of what's called black shamanism that resisted Buddhism. Strongly ancestral, they commanded all forces of nature. They had the power of bilocation, so they could appear in more one place. And it's interesting. Again, I was talking about that talk you and Mockery, and this idea of having getting the frequency, so you can go from one frame of your life, if you like, to change to another one, moving through space and time. Supposedly he and the people on his line could do that, could raise a spirit army. That's made me think of the Lord of the Rings scenes. Genghis Khan was apparently terrified of these black shamans and ordered their extinction, but he does look scary. He does look like otherworldly. Like there's yeah, you wouldn't want to mess with that. Now this guy, Zhong Chang, people may have already seen. I think he's appeared quite a bit in. I think there was something. I must have written it down, but I can't remember if this is a title of a book or a film. But the Magus of Java. Debbie showed a clip. I would encourage you, if you haven't seen it before, just to Google it. It's on YouTube. But I again, these little synchronicities and little connections that he was sort of came to note in the West in this 1988 series called Ring of Fire, and I love that. I might possibly have shown it on a previous live stream, but it's these two brothers, Lorne Blair and Lawrence Blair, I think was the other name. But this influenced me so much when I was a kid. It was like I think they got money from Ringo Starr to do it, but they had very little money, but they went out and they were going around all these islands in Indonesia, hence Ring of Fire, because all these volcanoes, that's known as the Ring of Fire in that area, and went to all these amazing communities, all these traditional tribes, and it influenced me so much. So that's what, when I went traveling, Indonesia was, a lot of other people went to Thailand and other places, which I would have loved to go to as well, but I really wanted to go Indonesia because of Ring of Fire. I was inspired by that series. But within that, it was when one of the brothers had I think a problem with his eye, and they heard about this guy. He was like a healer, but he used I suppose, he's got different names, things like chi, but he can generate he got termed Dynamo Jack, but he can create electric pulses from within his body. So he did a form of like acupuncture with needles in certain points, which obviously is a traditional way of healing, but he created his own electricity, and you can see in the film with one of the brothers, and you can see him sort of jerking around because he's got electricity going through him. And then there's another scene within the documentary, which again you can find on YouTube. And he scrunches up a bit of paper, and you just see him with his hand just hovering just over the paper, and he creates sparks of electricity, and it catches light. And there's other bits in there where he's other people, are just sort of touching him on his stomach, and then he's creating a charge, and got an electric shock. But he's saying, I think that it's not everyone can have this power, and it's not it's not in itself something special if you can train yourself or be trained or learn how to harness this energy. But again, it comes from the solar plexus, and I think that was, remember when I said about Jamie Pickup talking about the Glastonbury tour being like the solar plexus of the Earth and energy coming out from there to the rest of the world. But yeah, it seems to come from that area around the bottom of around the stomach, but also the sort of the top of the groin area. And Debbie made the point, as you would have seen from my earlier talks when I talked about Turkey and things like that, and also on what Liz laughingly termed Mark's big penis talk when I was talking about the Origins conference, which Debbie has also spoken at as well. But as she pointed out, there's so many of these statues, like, again, you can see the pictures there, like Earther Man, and big one that's been found at Karan Tepe, but also other parts of the world where these statues they're shown with their like huge figures, like sort of humanoid type figures, but they've got the hands in that region. I mean, some have also got their willy on show, but others it's just a case of it's around the area, around the solar plexus and just at the top of the pelvic area. So she's saying it's like they're indicating that's where the energy is. But yeah, Whispering, that scene, it does. I mean, obviously the cynics will say, "Oh, it was faked" and stuff, but it's pretty close up, the picture, and no doubt in my mind that 100%. He was generating that electricity from his body and nothing else to light up that paper. Debbie was saying that shaman means Skywalker. I think I've definitely heard similar before. So maybe again, it's like some people talk about whether he had knowledge of things, Lucas, or not, or whether he was part of a program that was putting stuff out there, or whether he had intuitive knowledge of these things. But again, this idea, I suppose he is Joseph Campbell. He's admits, obviously, he's very influenced by Joseph Campbell. So maybe there's talk of that in there. But yeah, that idea of going out with the spirits. So a Skywalker, but in terms of going to another level of consciousness, to the other world. Debbie quoted another person that I'm influenced for, and I've done a talk about before, David Bohm, Bohm. Never quite sure how to pronounce his name. I think it's just Bomb, but it just sounds unfortunate, really. When he talks with Krishnamurti, the Indian who was supposed to be mystic, pure energy of mind is able to reach into the limited energy of matter. As a question, yes, and it can change the limitation. So again, this idea that mind can change the material world. Again, another quote from McKenna: shaman from the dawning of history unite the doctor, the scientist, the artist into a single notion of caregiving and creativity. And that's pretty incredible incredible quote, I think. So Debbie was saying it's all about, I think these capabilities of the human. We are all capable of this power, and we have it in us, or the potential for it at least. McKenna also said that shamanism is a living tradition of alchemy. So that's interesting. But so I suppose again it's this idea of transforming matter. That is not seeking the stone, but has found the stone. So from Debbie's point of view, she doesn't like the idea of there being, when people talk about aliens, she says, we as humans are powerful. We created, or our ancestors, human ancestors, created sites like Göbekli Tepe, these incredible Neolithic sites. She's, doesn't agree with the idea that knowledge came from an alien race to awaken humanity. It's like we had these advanced abilities then, and I suppose people like Chang in the modern day show that there's still a line that's come from people with this shamanistic practices. And Debbie said Tastepla, these sites in Turkey, are not about the past but the future. When we're not displaced, when we're all powerful and we're all shamans, which is a pretty damn good quote to end on. Now people are doing really well to keep with me. I'm thinking I've still got a few things to do, so we might have to move a bit swiftly through the others, because people are probably going to fall unconscious if I don't. The next speaker I'm going to talk about anyway was Mark Vernon, and I also purchased his book, which is called Awake, William Blake and the Power of the Imagination. And this was another thing that struck a chord with me, as I have been interested in Blake since I was a kid, and I've always loved his prioritizing, if you like, of the power of the imagination and equating it with the spiritual, and his dislike and passion against the forces of control and regulation, trying to rationalize reality, and I guess in terms of what we were talking before about drawing solid lines around it and trying to put it into boxes. And this image that he showed of Blake's, I think it's The Ancient of Days, but it's his character Urizen, who's like his demiurge figure. And he was saying it's just this character, I mean, he's an eternal, and he's if you like within the sun, or it's behind him, and he's got all the elements of the wind and all his power, but he's leaning down and with these compasses. So it's like he's leaning down to create the earth, but it's within the compasses, it's being drawn lines around like a material world, like a creation, but it's the real power, if you like, of the sun and the elements is above, but this world below is being created and it's being marked out and defined. You know, what Blake termed the ratio, this idea of things being limited, and he was saying you have to think outside the ratio, and you can't, if you something about can't remember the quote exactly, but by traveling over known lands you can't then find out anything new. So basically the power of the imagination is the idea of vision. It's seeing outside of this, the box of the lines that divide up the material world. And this is if I go to the next picture, so this is he's another one of his characters, Los or Los, LOS, so I guess Sol around the other way, which means the sun. So he's Blake's figure of the imagination, the power of the imagination, but he has to engage with his spectre, which tries to define things with reason and separate a reason separated from humanity. But Los builds Golgonooza, which is a great city of the imagination. So I guess again, it's about the power of the imagination, but you need to not be tied down by this, or not have reason separated from humanity. So there must always be this this vision and imagination to avoid being entrapped. The tangle of innocence and experience, which is, I suppose, when you've got, you could say you've got that with the imagination and the spectre of reason. But I think with a lot of like his writings, when you're talking about Marriage of Heaven and Hell, Songs of Innocence and Experience, it is an acknowledgement that you need, or that life anyway, or existence, is about an intertwining of those things. But for him, the primary thing should be the imagination and desire. And what was important in terms of Vernon's talk specifically, as I say, obviously looking at William Blake and the power of the imagination, but in terms of the talk, and goes into, I've only just been looking at a bit of the book. He's talking about AI. The triangle on the Jesus picture area. Yeah. Yes, that's another thing of dividing up. I suppose a lot of these codes, they're about dividing up something that was Liz says that the symposium wasn't as long as this talk. Okay, all right, I'll try and move it along, people, because you've done very well for keeping with me so far. And you know, maybe people can listen back anyway if they want to fall asleep. But Mark Vernon is talking about AI, and I think it's very important because he was using these examples from Blake. The power of the imagination not to be reduced, because for Vernon, he was saying he doesn't believe, and I'm with him, I don't think that AI can have the kind of imaginative consciousness that humans can. It's like a Tanishka, actually, who was at the conference and appeared on like the Saturday panel, but wasn't talking previously. But I saw on a video when she was talking about the Lions Gate, 8th of August, 8/8. But she was talking about all these AI companies and about they're trying to accumulate knowledge, but it's just like it's data, but that's not the same as wisdom. And this is a very similar thing in terms of what Vernon's talking about. Andy Thomas asked the question afterwards, because he'd been talking a lot about AI in recent years and saying, people talking about singularity is going to happen soon, and how do you think that's going to affect things? And Mark Vernon was saying he doesn't believe that that's actually going to be a thing. He thinks that's a narrative that they've created. There's going to be singularity and AI is going to be at the same level, on a par with the human brain, human thinking, and he doesn't believe it. And I'm with Vernon. And I think it was a good example talking about from the book, this character Urizen, the one who's sort of about reason. He can't relate to the things around him. He launches into a frenzy of analysis like a crazed billionaire, convinced that the larger the data center, the greater the power. Times on times he divided and measured space by space in his ninefold darkness. And then this los appears, the imagination, trying to reintroduce this idea of transcendent imagination. Los makes Urizen a body, but this becomes a torment because he's like a biological robot. So again, these ideas of AI. And Vernon said, or writes in the book, Blake has mythologically captured the ambivalences with which we must wrestle. Modernity produces better theories, possibly advanced technology for sure, but also a sidelining of the animate, of the spirit, of the transcendent. Urizen in the poem faces the trade-off between more knowledge and less meaning. Quote, and now his eternal life like a dream was obliterated. And then Los also gets trapped, cut off from life like frozen. And this is what happens when civilization forgets its source. No one escapes unscathed. So I think I'll move on because of lack of time, but again, it struck a chord and I bought the book because William Blake is, again, someone that I've done a talk on. And I think I wholeheartedly agree with Mark Vernon's presentation and the power of the imagination, which is one and the same as the spiritual, is something that they shouldn't be allowed to, which they're trying to like get out of us one way or another. But yeah, good wins out, love is stronger. So I think that's a good thing lesson. This finishing this picture, another Blake picture, and Mark Vernon was talking about it being it's symbolizing like the silicon, like the soul of the silicon chip. So it's supposed to have this power, but it's really just trapped inside. And again, it's reductionist. It's not it doesn't have a true vision. So Igor Eckhout, he's the chap that I've spoken to a little bit. I spoke to him briefly at the conference and spoken to him on Facebook. Very kindly said that he would come on the channel at some stage. So I'm really delighted and honored about that. Now, he again had various resonances that struck chords with me. He had an experience Alton Barnes, which is not far from here, which near Avebury, when he saw these 3 plasma balls on top of Knapp Hill. And he was saying he was a bit of a skeptic and just not sure what they were. And he said he asked them, but just in his mind, just to see if there could be that interaction. He sort of asked them to give him a sign if they were conscious. I can't remember exact words that he used, but he said, and then these plasma balls, they changed into humanoid forms in the sky. But he was with someone, and this other person had this, saw the same thing. He kept getting these synchronicities, well, different things, kept on seeing swans, like some sort of synchronicity kept echoing in his mind. And that involved looking up Andrew Collins' work again. As I've talked before, the Cygnus Key, the Cygnus Mystery. Andrew was talking about the importance of the Cygnus constellation at the time of the Task Teplicites. It was North Star, or the Deneb, the most visible of those stars in the constellation, was like the North Star. And he made very convincing, in my mind, research that the Task Teplicites were aligned to the Cygnus constellation. And again, connecting to the shamanism talk, a lot of those shamans in Siberia, swans are, not to say worship, but venerated as being like spirits, spirit animals, and psychopomps in terms of taking spirits to the underworld or connecting with the shaman. So he looked up, Cygnus constellation. He found Andrew Collins' work. He corresponded with Andrew. He's very generous with his time, is Andrew, and information. Now, like a numpty, when I went to Igor's talk, I had my notebook with me to take notes, and I forgot to take my pen. So I had to take a few photographs of the slides in the presentation just to remind myself. I am going to get his book. I haven't yet because it's sold out on the symposium, but I'm going to order it. But yeah, this amazing sight he had where the plasma balls turned into humanoid figures. And then Andrew Collins found, I can't remember if it was correspondence he'd had or some report somewhere else, and completely different third party who was in that area the same night also reported and drew the same thing. So one of these experiences that they're people to think that there's different levels of reality. So he started to look into Cygnus, let's say through Andrew's work. So that was the book that I talked about with Andrew Collins, the Cygnus Key. So connecting it all up from Denisovans in Siberian area, Göbekli Tepe in Egypt as well. So Igor talking about this Cygnus 3 neutron star, which is in that constellation, which sends hypergenetic particles. These signets are trapped in crystals in the Earth's crust and liberated by tectonic stress, producing piezoelectric geoplasma. So again, I've done a talk about plasma as well. Now, similar to Jamie's talk, there's a lot of number stuff with Igor's that I can't do justice to because it's not something that I'm able to follow. But I'm going to get this Igor's book. He also talks about language, so that's more something that will resonates from my side. So hallucinogens, language of creation. It says Igor Oakwood. I think maybe, I don't know if he's from Belgium, but I don't know if that's another name he goes by. But anyway, that is the same Igor. But yeah, his books, the books he had there sold out very quickly, so I didn't get hold of one. But yeah, I think I might actually have to draw things to a close, really, because I'm getting tired and probably it's been going on too long. I maybe need to do a little follow-up to talk some more about Igor's work. And there was just really a couple of other talks. But it would be important to just mention about Patricia Corey as well, who was the final speaker. But I'll maybe come back and do a little bit of a mop-up talk another time. But just to really reiterate that it's such an amazing conference again. But yeah, my apologies, I didn't get through everything that I wanted to do, but rather over anticipated the length of time. But I suppose when everyone's doing hour or hour plus talks, it's a lot of information to get through. But yeah, thank you for sticking with me, those that stuck with me, and I will do a follow-up just with some extra information about a bit more about Igor's information. But do have a look at him on his he did an excellent article on the Ancient Origins site. You can have a look at that. So there's information there which has some of the that came up as in the talk. Missed you too, Green Tea. Yeah, it's been good. But yeah, I can't believe the time where it's got to. But yeah, I will try and catch up and just do a little bit extra on the rest of it. Not too much more. But yeah, thanks all for listening to me, and I will speak to you again soon. Hope you all have good weeks ahead.